Welcome to this video where we are going to talk through another exam question in the AQA GCSE History exam, and it's paper 1 part B, and this is going to look at conflict and tension 1918 to 1939, and we're going to be looking specifically at question 2. Now in question 2 you're going to be expected to analyse and evaluate sources. So what does question 2 look like? Well, it will be a question that will tell you to study two sources. You'll have the sources booklet and you'll have your exam booklet, and it will direct you to the sources booklet and tell you to look at two sources, sources B and C. And it will then ask you how useful are these sources to a historian studying, and I've put here XXXX, but it could be whatever period, whatever event. And then you need to explain your answer using sources B and C and your contextual knowledge. So it's asking you to use both sources, and this comment here, your contextual knowledge. What do you know? What can you remember? What have you revised? And you now need to draw on that in answering this question. We know it's a 12-mark question, so some of the things we should be able to identify straight away. 12-mark questions should be taking us approximately 15 minutes in the exam, and we should be aiming to write 3 paragraphs. So we always need to bear that in mind. Don't forget, every 4-mark question means we're spending 5 minutes on 1 paragraph. So this is 12 marks, so 3 paragraphs and 15 minutes. And to give you a little bit of an idea of how the marking will be distributed for this exam, I've put a marking guide in front of you now. Now the examiner, when they mark it, they're going to give it one of 4 levels, 1 being at the bottom and 4 being at the top. And you can see they've got some guidance that will help them decide which level your answer will be. Once they've given it a level, they then need to decide what marks it's going to get. Is it at the bottom end of a level? So for example, if it was at the bottom end of a level 3, it would get 7 marks. Or is it at the top end of a level 3? So it would get 9 marks. But that gives you an idea of what the examiner is going to be looking at and using to base their judgment when they see your exam, when they see your answer. So we need to think about this idea of a source. We're going to see 2 sources. Don't forget, when we're looking at sources, we need to remember 2 factors, provenance and content. Now the provenance, who wrote it? This can often be important. Are they going to be showing bias? Is there a reason why they wrote this? Is it a speech? Is it a newspaper article? Is it a diary? Quite often, if you write something in a personal diary, you'll write very differently than if you're writing in a speech. You might disclose different views. That's important to consider. Where's the source from? A source that was produced in Germany during World War I will be very different to a source produced in Britain during World War I. Each will have its own reason for being written and try to convey a different message. What kind of source is it? As I said, a speech would be different to a diary, which would be different to a recruiting poster or a propaganda. All of these are important factors. And then finally, the timing of the source. That would be something to consider, particularly when it's written around the time of a significant event taking place. And then you look at the content. What does the source actually say? What does it show? And how is this useful? So we need to start looking at a question for us to see how this answer would develop. And the source that we've got in front of us now, source B, is from a cartoon published in a British magazine in August 1935. I'm going to give you a couple of moments quickly to take that in. We've got 2 figures pointing at another figure, and we've got a warning at the bottom, the awful warning. So that's source B, and it's taken from a British magazine in August 1935. Source C, that's a speech. I'm going to give you a few moments to read through that. Press pause if you need to read it, but you've got a bit of an opportunity to now look at that, and it's a speech made in December 1935. So we've seen our 2 sources. This is the question that we've now been given to answer. Study sources B and C. How useful are sources B and C to a historian studying the Abyssinian Crisis? Explain your answer using sources B and C and your contextual knowledge. So clearly we're going to need to know something about the Abyssinian Crisis, and we're going to need to refer to these 2 sources. I want to take you back to the beginning when I said that we were going to be writing 3 paragraphs for this answer. Now that's going to remain the same. We need to write 3 paragraphs, but these paragraphs do not need to be the same size. So when we're answering this question, we need to consider writing about 45% of our time on paragraph 1, and that will look at the first source. Paragraph 2, a similar amount on the second source, and then for paragraph 3, just a very short recap. How useful are these sources? So let's have a look at an example. You've got an example paragraph in front of you now that looks at source B. I'm going to give you a few moments to read through that. Press pause on the screen and have a read through that source. That's an example answer produced by a student. Now once you've read through that, we just need to start identifying the different parts. The key aspect for every answer should be point, evidence, explain. So let's make sure that's there first of all. And we've got the point, and I've highlighted that in yellow for you. We can see this student has opened up their answer with a point. They've then backed it up with some evidence, and I've highlighted that in green for you. And this student is able to draw on their knowledge. They've talked about Haile Selassie, going to the League of Nations and asking for the League of Nations to help. And then finally, the student has explained why this is useful. And I've highlighted that in blue for you. Now I quickly want to just jump back to that question. So I've brought it back up on the screen in front of you. Study sources B and C. How useful are sources B and C to a historian studying the Abyssinian Crisis? Some key word here that we need to pick up on. And it's the word how useful. That's what the examiner is asking us to answer. How useful are sources B and C? So in your answer, when you start this final part of the answer, you need to make sure you say, this is useful because. That will make sure that you're thinking about how useful the source is, but it also signposts the examiner, the person marking your exam, to that part of your answer, and make sure they realise you understand how useful the source is. So that's an example of a first paragraph to answer this question. What I want you to do now is to write your own paragraph for the second source. I've put the source back up on the screen in front of you to help you, but I want you to write a paragraph for this source. I've also given you some words to help you whilst you're writing this paragraph, words that you should be including in your own answer. Words such as League of Nations, this is useful because, secret agreement, Britain, France, provenance. Now you're going to need some knowledge about the Abyssinian Crisis, so if required, press pause, go and do a little bit of revision, then come back and answer that question. Once you've done that, carry on with the video. And now I've shown you an example of a paragraph for source C, and that's already highlighted for you. So in yellow we can see the point, in green we can see the evidence, and in blue we can see the explain. I've also highlighted in red the words this is useful because it's really important we include that in our answer. Now press pause if you need to, copy it down, take a screenshot of it. It is always useful to have this bank of examples to draw on when you're practicing your revision and you're practicing your own answers. We're then going to move on to this final short paragraph. And there's an example in front of you. And essentially all we are doing at this point is just explaining why the two sources are important to a historian. And in this answer the student has said what source B shows, and then very briefly explain source C. But it's very short, there's not as much detail here as there has been in paragraph 1 and in paragraph 2. So that's the answer. We've gone through an example for question 2. Something to consider. Is it useful for you saying if a source is not useful? Now this will be classed as describing the source's limitations. The short answer is yes, you can do that. However, it must be relevant to the question. You really do risk writing too much when you start discussing why a source is not relevant. And in all reality, you can get full marks on this question. You'll get 12 marks. And you do not need to say why a source is not useful. And I've put a direct quote from the AQA marking guidelines here. Full marks on this question are easily accessible without any mention of limitations. So there we go. We've gone through question 2. Use this as a guide when you next have this question as homework or you need to practice your own revision material. Thanks very much.